Hello, everyone. This is recording number 10 for Early Stoic Philosophy, a class on Stoic logic, physics, and ethics. Today, I want to talk about a key idea in Stoic ethics, namely the Stoic view that the end, the telos, is life in agreement with nature. Now, this idea is often called a telos formula. What that means is it is a kind of formulaic response to the question, what is the telos? What is the end? The Stoics agree with other ancient ethicists that eudaimonia, the Greek term for happiness, where happiness is not a kind of momentary state of being elated, but happiness is a well-lived human life. The Stoics agree with other ancient ethicists that eudaimonia, happiness in that sense, is the final end. But one can agree on that and nevertheless disagree on what a happy life looks like. That is, one can agree on, as it were, the blueprint of the type of theory that one is putting forward is one where we accept that, well, the final end is happiness. But then substantively, we still need to say something about what that happy or well-lived human life looks like. And the Stoic answer to that question, to what is the end or what does that happy life look like? The Stoic answer to that is the end is life in agreement with nature. Now, one reason why that proposal is so famous is that it is put forward in a number of versions. And these versions are put forward as definitions. So when you look at the texts that were signed for us this week, you'll read the Stoics define the end as life in agreement with nature. The Stoics define the end as life in agreement with virtue. The Stoics define the end as life in agreement with concordant reason. The Stoics define the end, and then the definitions get longer and longer, and they include, for example, experience of what happens by nature, or they include specifications of what we take this notion of nature to stand for here. For example, Chrysippus thinks that the nature with which we need to live in agreement is not only the common nature, the nature of the universe, but also human nature. And Cleanthes thinks that that is mistaken and that really only the nature of the universe or the common nature is what we need to live in agreement with, not human nature. So we have this list of definitions of the end. And what I have mentioned now is not an exhaustive list, so there's even more. And a question we can ask ourselves, or one thing we can find perplexing here, is how is it possible that the Stoics offer so many definitions of the same thing? Shouldn't there be a background assumption here that for anything that we want to define, there's going to be one correct definition? And you may hold that that is a natural assumption, or you may come to the study of Stoic philosophy with that assumption in the back of your mind. For example, because you read Plato, and there oftentimes Socrates asks one of these what is X questions. And then a number of definitions are discussed in a dialogue. But there the assumption is that only one answer to a what is X question is going to be the correct answer. And maybe other answers, they may enable you to work toward a definition. They may help you understand something, clarify something, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, there's going to be one correct answer to a definitional question. And with that assumption in mind, you may find the Stoic proposals quite perplexing because they seem to kind of happily offer a multitude of definitions. And this has been famously discussed by Gisela in a number of papers with respect to this idea that life in agreement with nature is the end. And she drew attention to the fact that that is potentially perplexing and that we need to somehow come up with a compelling reading of this. And one particular aspect that scholars have discussed in response to Gisela Stryker's contributions is that Zeno, the earliest Stoic, said that the end is life in agreement. And then later Stoics were saying, well, the end is life in agreement with nature. So one question that was being discussed is, well, are they correcting Zeno? Are they saying, well, that is kind of an incomplete claim? If you say the end is life in agreement, then someone is going to ask, well, in agreement with what? So Zeno's proposal may seem incomplete. Or alternatively, we may think that Zeno's formulation is just very compressed and that these longer formulations that I offered are articulations and kind of ways of spelling out what is in a condensed form contained in Zeno's proposal. Now, I want to propose that a compelling reconstruction of the multitude of Stoic definitions of the end should meet 3 criteria. And these criteria, on the one hand, have something to do with the substance of Stoic ethics. But on the other hand, they relate to Stoic theory of definition. And I would like to suggest that it is, in fact, a noteworthy feature of Stoic philosophy that the Stoics are not committed to the idea that for any one thing that we want to define, there is going to be only one correct definition. So here are the 3 criteria that I think a plausible reconstruction of this multitude of definitions of the end should meet. One is it should permit for disagreement. So as we already saw, there is at times disagreement among the Stoics. We saw that Chrysippus and Cleanthes hold different views. Chrysippus says, well, life in agreement with nature, when we talk about nature here, nature includes both the nature of the universe and the nature of human beings. And Cleanthes says, no, it only includes the nature of the universe or common nature. So that looks, at least that is reported as a disagreement. It is somewhat perplexing the way it is reported because Chrysippus is later than Cleanthes, so we shouldn't assume that Cleanthes, as it were, responds to Chrysippus. Nevertheless, it looks as if 2 of the major Stoics hold genuinely different views. Another dimension of the Stoic theory that our reconstruction should acknowledge, I think, is that there is this idea that longer definitions can articulate. That is a technical term in Stoic theory of definition. Longer definitions can articulate shorter definitions. So we should not aim to, as it were, pick the correct definition among a list of proposals if some of those definitions simply look like longer and more detailed versions of a shorter definition. Here we should assume, well, that is a kind of multiplicity of definitions that is just fine for the Stoics, because they think that that is something that definitions do. Some of them, they think, just remind us of a preconception that we already have, and others articulate this idea further, and that's just fine. And the third criterion that our reconstruction should meet is what we may call equivalence. It should be okay for the Stoics to offer different but ultimately equivalent definitions. And I want to end the recording by just suggesting how, for example, the end is life in agreement with nature and the end is life in agreement with virtue are equivalent. And in order to see that, we need more or less all the things that we've studied throughout the semester. We need to ask ourselves, well, life in agreement with nature, what would that be? Well, that would be life in agreement with the knowledge of everything in the world. And that knowledge includes logic, physics, and ethics. Oh, and then we see, well, those are the three generic virtues as we studied. So this way it turns out that, in fact, for the Stoics, life in agreement with nature, because it is life that is guided by knowledge of the world and everything in it and our place in it. For that reason, life in agreement with nature, in fact, is life in agreement with the virtues.